Hey there, everybody. Father Aaron here from The Joy of Seeing, and I just wanted to do a video follow-up since we had a little bit of a technical glitch with Catherine and Mai's conversation about Santa Claus and Advent. So I'm going to do my very best to try and sum up what our conversation orbited around, and I'm going to try and do it in a relatively succinct kind of way. So if there's anything that I cover that, hey, you remember, or that you remember us talking about but don't remember what we said, let Catherine or I know, Catherine at Nazareth Pottery and me at The Joy of Seeing, and we will do our best to cover it when we get to our next session this coming Saturday. Right, the whole conversation kind of orbited around Santa Claus. And we talked about how Santa Claus is something of a controversial topic, particularly among Christians, because at least on the surface, Santa Claus seems to represent some sort of like a corporate or secular overtaking of the spirit of Christmas, what our focus is supposed to be. So Catherine and I first just started with the very basic conversation. Who or what was Santa to us as we were growing up? And Catherine said, she didn't grow up with Santa Claus as part of the story, the myth of Christmas around their house. And she said she was grateful for that because that was her parents being true to themselves. I grew up sort of on the other end of the spectrum. I said I was very grateful for my parents always infusing a sense of magic into Christmas. I was just absolutely taken with the idea of Santa Claus. I mean, Santa's reindeer came and they ate part of the carrots that we left out for him. Santa ate the cookies and drank the milk. The kind of biggest thing that I remembered was, and I said, I still don't know how my parents did it, so they can't quite convince me, even at 30 years old, that there isn't some magic that goes with the vocation of being parents. But it was a sack that was burlap and it had a picture of Santa on the front, and that was what Santa's gifts came in. And without fail, every year we would be eating breakfast, we'd be getting ready for church, we would just be playing with our toys, and the bag could have been anywhere near us, and it disappeared. I still don't know how mom and dad did it. I'm still not convinced that, like I said, there's not a little bit of magic in being a parent. And Catherine had asked me, okay, well, did that kind of eclipse Jesus for you? And of course, I mean, as a kid, you're drawn to the new shiny toy that maybe you have, or you're drawn to some of the candy or something like that. I said that was the case for sure, but it wasn't because of Santa. It was just little kid excitement. But actually, as time went on, what I discovered that Santa did is he actually expanded the mystery, the magic of that night of Christmas Eve. In essence, he sort of expanded my heart to be ready to receive Jesus. And this is where you heard me use the phrase, the myth of Christmas. And we hear the word myth, and sometimes we're very afraid of it because we think myth means not true. And of course, we as Christians believe that the story of Christmas given to us in the Gospels is true. God became man. He is God with us. This is a historical reality, unlike any other, that God took on flesh. But the idea of myth here is the story, the truth of the matter, the thing that endures, that perseveres. And so when I talk about Santa as being part of the myth of Christmas, he is part of the story of Christmas. So let's pause on talking about some of those big ideas and just focus on Santa for a moment, because Santa came from St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas is a bishop of Myra, which is a port city in the ancient world. So he's exposed to a lot of different cultures. He is a man of deep courage and generosity. If you had to define him just by two traits, those would be it. So generosity we know well enough, right? We know the story, most of us do, of him sneaking and leaving gold. The story is typically of a family that had 3 daughters and didn't have money for a dowry for them. Excuse me. And typically when a family didn't have money for a dowry, unfortunately the girls would oftentimes end up in slavery or selling their bodies. And so Nicholas, as their bishop, gathered up some of the money, the wealth of the church, and gave it to the family so that they could afford dowries, that they could afford to not sell their daughters into slavery or into prostitution. So we know of Nicholas's great generosity, but his courage also. We actually have the bones of Nicholas, and forensic historians are able to look and tell that he was tortured. I think you can look at his fingers and see that they were broken. You can see that his nose had been broken, that there was damage to a cheek. He was also a martyr, and he was therefore a man of really great courage for the gospel, a man of deep principle. So one of the stories that we have, it was an early Christian heresy, one of the very first, called Arianism, and it was the belief that Jesus wasn't God. He was like the greatest thing God created. So obviously this was a problem, but it was a widespread problem, and so the bishops of the church gathered to try and solve this, and the Bishop Arius was there, who kind of started this whole heresy, and he starts waxing on about his heretical ideas. And Nicholas is so incensed by this that somebody would dare say that Jesus is not God, that he got up across the floor and just smacked Arius. And we're not talking like a catfight smack, we're talking about like a full-on like illegal boxer slap, like across the face. Now, this is not permission for us to go and slap those who teach the Catholic faith falsely, right? Nicholas is not Saint Nicholas yet. Good impulse, defend the faith, maybe not the best execution of it, but nonetheless it reveals his courage and his principles. Also, Nicholas is known as a great wonder worker. So in some ways, his earliest reputation is that actually of almost a kind of superhero. So he's a lot of times pictured with these three boys coming out of a vat or a tub. There was a serial killer who would kill children, and Nicholas found him out and called the boys back to life. That's the story that's being referenced. He was a great exorcist. And so this is a man of great connection with the Lord, great mystical life of prayer, and great power. So in some ways, there is already a deep magic that is connected to the idea of the man who will become Santa Claus. So, and when I say deep magic, I'm borrowing that phrase from C.S. Lewis. I'm not talking about occult magic or secular magic. I'm talking about magic as the thing that moves reality. And we have to remember, we have a magical view of reality, or a view of reality that isn't just limited to the empirical, what we can see, taste, touch, feel. Otherwise, we wouldn't believe in guardian angels. We wouldn't believe in the miraculous. We wouldn't believe that we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, the great saints and angels who have gone before us, praying for us, cheering us on in this race of life. So why wouldn't we believe in a Santa Claus, right? In a Saint Nicholas who has continued to be generous, particularly around the birth of the Savior. C.S. Lewis uses the phrase deep magic to define the law of the universe in his Chronicles of Narnia. And so I use that idea of magic in talking about Santa, and I think that we as Christians should feel comfortable with that idea as well. So my parents kind of brought this idea of the deep magic into our life as a family and related that, where Santa Claus was Saint Nicholas, who was living the spirit of generosity shown first by Jesus in becoming man, right, in emptying himself, as that great hymn from St. Paul says, right, he emptied himself and took the form of a slave. There's the reason for our generosity at Christmas. God pours himself out so we imitate him. And Nicholas is caught up in that mystery. And so in sharing in God's own generosity, gosh, why wouldn't he be able to master 8 reindeer and travel around the world and pour out in generosity his kindness in honor of God's kindness? So the whole mystery of Christmas was caught up in Nicholas or Santa Claus being generous. And so if anything, rather than distracting from Jesus, the mystery, the myth of Santa opened mine and my siblings' hearts to receiving the true magic of a God who pours himself out. So I guess I want us to move the conversation around Santa Claus away from, gosh, is Santa lying to your children, or is he not, or is it bringing the secular culture into your home? Right? Catherine and I both wanted to move away from that idea because, first off, there is definitely a way to bring St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, into our homes without lying. And so this was, I joked, I said, I believed in Santa, as I still believe in Santa, but I believed in the myth of Santa, as we sometimes tell it to children, for a long time. And so I remember my parents breaking that news to me, and they did it so beautifully. I said they called me into their bedroom, which was always a big thing, as my siblings and I like to get called into mom and dad's bedroom. But they didn't say that Santa didn't exist, and so I just needed to grow up and deal with it. Instead, they said that they had been sharing in the spirit of St. Nicholas, who shared in the spirit of God's generosity. And now that I knew that they were sharing in his work, it was my turn to do the same. And so I got to do that for my sister and my brother. And then when my sister found out, it was the same for the brother. And now we as a family still, Santa Claus comes to our house. And what it is this super abundant illustration of really my parents' generosity in their vocation. But it's this recognition that it's a generosity in being parents that's beyond them. And I can tell my parents till I'm blue in the face, I don't need anything for Christmas. But for whatever reason, Santa Claus still comes. And it's a beautiful illustration that they're never gonna not be my parents. Just like God, when we're undeserving, continues to give to us. There's something sacramental about this reality that Santa creates a doorway through which the generosity of God can be shown. A generosity that isn't about me, isn't about mom and dad, it's just the generosity of God laid forth. So, Catherine and I said, okay, how do we bring this in? She and her husband, speaking as a young couple, God willing, able to have and raise kids to experience Christmas. What advice would I give as a priest? Well, I've alluded to a lot of it. A lot of this is first that we have to be Catholic, not just at Christmas, just like we don't be Catholic on Sunday alone. So hopefully that parents are raising their kids to experience reality with the idea that you do have an angel accompanying you, like our faith believes, that you can talk to a saint as I'm talking to you now. And no, you may not see them, but gosh, at any moment it's possible that you could see them. Right? So we already have a view of reality that is magical, you might say, but instead of that being a threat, it actually charges our reality with a truly Catholic vision. And so maybe start with your kids of talking about Nicholas and talking about the reality of the possibility of the miraculous, talking about how Santa Claus reveals the generosity of God, and little by little the things that will be left behind, right? I don't often think much of the 8 tiny reindeer accompanying Santa when he visits my family, but I do think of his generosity. I do think of the magic of completely unseen, unknown. A gift comes into the world that is beyond what I asked for or thought I needed. Right? It's creating an imaginative environment that is ready to receive the good seed of the gospel. And so that sets kids up. I know that parents are afraid that, hey, look, if my kid believes in Santa Claus and then they find out that he's not empirically true in the way that Coca-Cola presents him, that my kid will then stop believing in God. But brothers and sisters, I think the reality is that if we stop believing in God because of Santa or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, and those aren't all on the same level, by the way, it's our image of God that needs to become greater, that needs to become richer. So a few things that I suggested maybe that you could read. So first, G.K. Chesterton has a great article about why he still believes in Santa Claus. And essentially it comes down to Santa reveals God to him, like I've been saying, and his gratitude to Santa Claus that was just during Christmas has expanded to be his gratitude towards God that exists at all times. So it might be worth reading as parents to just get an insight into things. I think the best is Letters from Father Christmas by J.R.R. Tolkien. So Tolkien was, of course, the master of myth, and in fact, he described the gospel as myth made fact. So far from myth being something threatening, myth was something that revealed the gospel, that got our hearts ready for the good news of God become man. And so he would write letters from Father Christmas to his children, but Tolkien was never outdone in telling a story. And so not only would Father Christmas write to his children, but then the elves, who were much more like the Lord of the Rings elves, mysterious, older than the world, ethereal, almost angelic beings, they would write to his kids. There was a kind of dopey polar bear who served as sort of the sheriff of the North Pole, and he would write sometimes. And then there were goblins that would threaten the North Pole. And so they would need to sometimes fight them off and protect the stories, or protect the reality of Christmas. And each of the characters had different handwriting. Tolkien would sometimes draw pictures, and the polar bear's pictures to his kids would look different from Father Christmas's, would look different from the elves. And all of this structured his children's imagination to be looking for more, right? To believe, if we believe that, Santa Claus, Father Christmas, Sinterklaas can travel the world on 8 tiny reindeer, God becoming man, our imagination is ready to stretch to that even more incredible thing. God becoming man is way, way harder to believe, I think, than 8 tiny reindeer managing to fly, because at least that's in the realm of nature. But this is something where God breaks in from the supernatural realm into the natural. So again, it's all about what happens to our imagination. Do we have baptized imaginations? And then we talked about what are some of the things that maybe help our imagination. Catherine and I both remembered fondly the Polar Express. I love the Santa Claus with Tim Allen, however, kind of married to the 90s and some of the cultural tensions that go on there. I had forgotten, there's actually a really great story, great movie. It didn't do well in the box office, but it's called The Rise of the Guardians. And it presents the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy as these sort of super heroic figures. Think of it as like if all of the characters on the calendar got together like the Avengers, but Santa is sort of this almost kind of Russian, almost pirate kind of figure, but he's heroic. He's a good, jolly man. It's sort of fascinating and a fun little spark to the imagination. So what do we take away from all of this? And granted, I have condensed a whole hour of conversation into about 20 minutes, which I'm sort of impressed with, to be honest with you. It's a matter of being true to how you feel called to share this with your children, but I don't want to leave Catholics, Christians, with the sense that Santa Claus is a threat to us. We shaped so much of Western culture as Catholics and Christians. And so in some ways, we should take back these ideas. So yeah, don't let Coca-Cola tell you who Santa is. Let the gospel tell you who Santa is. Let Santa expand and prepare your heart for the gospel as somebody who comes at night in mystery, stopped by no door, no chimney, no anything, to bring goodness, to bring gifts that may or may not be deserved. That prepares our heart to receive the reality, the factual, empirical reality that God became man in history and reigns triumphant, separating the good from the bad. And that's a whole different conversation. Look up Krampus, look up some of those things as the reminder that even Santa points to the fact that the good and the bad are judged, and it ain't just coal that the bad get. But instead, we look and see that at his best, Santa can serve to prepare our hearts through Advent for the coming of the greatest gift, which is God. God made man. So anyway, if you have any questions, get them to us. We'll be back probably this coming Saturday night. And we love doing this. We love sharing this with you. We got some fun ideas coming. Pray for us. We're praying for you. God bless you.